The first shot echoed through the quiet evening like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds scattering from the cottonwoods that lined Bentonville's Main Street. Hannah Kelly flinched at the sound, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the warm Arizona evening in the summer of 1878. The involuntary movement sent a jolt of pain through her bruised ribs, and she bit her lip to keep from making a sound that might draw attention. "You best have dinner ready when I get back," Vernon's words from earlier still rang in her ears, his whiskey-soured breath and heavy hands a promise of what would come if she failed. Again, Hannah quickened her pace toward the general store, keeping her head down and her bonnet pulled low. 3 years of marriage to Vernon Kelly had taught her that invisibility was her only defense. The bruises beneath her high-necked dress were testament to how often that defense failed her. The bell above Whitaker's general store jingled as Hannah entered, and she nodded politely to Mrs. Whitaker behind the counter. The older woman's eyes lingered on Hannah's face a moment too long, and Hannah knew her attempts to cover the yellowing bruise at her jawline with powder hadn't been entirely successful. "Afternoon, Mrs. Kelly," Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice pitched with the same careful concern Hannah had grown accustomed to hearing from the townswomen. "What can I help you with today?" "Just some flour and sugar, please," Hannah replied, fishing the coins from her pocket. "And perhaps some coffee if there's enough left." Mrs. Whitaker nodded, gathering the items. "Your husband in town today?" Hannah's fingers tightened around the coins. "At the saloon, I expect." Mrs. Whitaker pursed her lips but said nothing more as she measured out the coffee beans. The door jingled again, and Hannah sensed rather than saw someone enter the store. The heavy tread of boots across the wooden floor told her it was a man, and she instinctively angled her body away, making herself smaller. "Afternoon, Mrs. Whitaker," a deep voice drawled, the accent not quite local. "Got that order of nails for Mr. Patterson?" "Right here, Mr. Lawson," Mrs. Whitaker replied, her tone warming considerably. "Just let me finish with Mrs. Kelly." Hannah kept her gaze fixed on the counter, counting out her coins carefully, aware of the stranger's presence like a weight in the room. When she finally chanced a glance upward, she found herself looking into the steadiest pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, his broad shoulders filling out a faded blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves to reveal tanned forearms dusted with dark hair. A worn Stetson sat low on his brow, but not low enough to hide those eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Madam," he said with a slight nod. Hannah quickly dropped her gaze, murmuring a response as she gathered her purchases. When she turned to leave, she moved too quickly, and a sharp pain from her ribs made her gasp. The small package of sugar slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Before she could bend to retrieve it, the stranger was there, crouching to pick it up. When he straightened and handed it back to her, those blue eyes lingered on her face, then briefly dropped to where her hand pressed against her side. "Thank you," she said, taking the package and turning away before he could say anything more. "You're welcome, madam," he replied, his voice gentler than before. Hannah hurried out of the store, feeling those eyes on her back all the way to the door. She didn't look back, didn't want to see the pity or, worse, the indifference that would surely be there. She'd seen both enough times from others in Bentonville to last a lifetime. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows down the dusty street as Hannah made her way home, a modest clapboard house at the edge of town. Vernon had been proud when he'd brought her here as his bride, boasting about the opportunities in Arizona territory for a man willing to work. The mining operations were bringing money and people to Bentonville, and Vernon had plans to establish himself as more than just a clerk at the assayer's office. Those dreams had soured quickly when the drinking started. and with it, the anger that seemed to live just beneath Vernon's skin, needing only the slightest provocation to erupt. Hannah entered the house and set to work immediately, stoking the stove and mixing dough for biscuits. Her movements were efficient but careful, each twist and bend measured to avoid aggravating her injuries. The bruises from 3 nights ago when Vernon had come home late and found the stew cold were still tender, purple marks spanning her ribs and back like a macabre painting. She was just putting the stew pot on to simmer when she heard the uneven footsteps on the porch that signaled Vernon's return. Hannah wiped her hands on her apron and steeled herself, pushing away the fear that rose like bile in her throat. The door banged open, and Vernon stood swaying slightly in the doorframe, his eyes bloodshot and narrow as they fixed on her. "Something smells good," he slurred, coming into the kitchen. "You finally learning how to be a proper wife." "Dinner will be ready soon," Hannah said, keeping her voice neutral. She'd learned that any emotion, fear, anger, even happiness could be the wrong one. Vernon grunted, dropping heavily into a chair at the table. His hand shot out suddenly, grabbing her wrist as she passed. "Come here, woman." Hannah stood very still as Vernon pulled her closer, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of her wrist. She could smell the whiskey on him, stronger than usual. "You talked to anyone in town today?" he demanded. "Just Mrs. Whittaker at the store," Hannah replied. Vernon's grip tightened. "What about just the groceries, Vernon? That's all." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if trying to catch her in a lie. Finally, he released her wrist with a little shove. "Get my dinner." Hannah turned back to the stove, relief washing through her. Some nights were worse than others, and she was beginning to think this might be one of the better ones. She ladled the stew into a bowl and set it before Vernon along with some fresh biscuits. As she turned to get him a glass of water, Vernon's voice stopped her. "Saw you talking to some cowboy at Whittaker's. Lottie Mason told me." Hannah's heart sank. Lottie Mason, the saloon girl who had her eye on Vernon, delighted in causing trouble. "I wasn't talking to anyone, Vernon. A man was there picking up supplies, but we didn't speak beyond pleasantries." Vernon's face darkened. "You calling Lottie a liar?" "No." The blow caught her across the cheek, snapping her head to the side. Hannah staggered, catching herself against the table. "Don't you lie to me," Vernon growled, rising from his chair. "Lottie said he was looking at you like he knew you." "He didn't," Hannah protested, backing away. "He was just being polite. He picked up a package I dropped, that's all." Vernon advanced on her, his face twisted with rage and drink. "You think I don't see how men look at you? You think I don't know what goes on when I'm not around?" "Vernon, please." The second blow knocked her to the floor, and after that, Hannah stopped trying to reason with him. She curled into herself, protecting her head and stomach as best she could as the kicks came, each one punctuated by accusations and curses. When it was finally over, Vernon stood over her, breathing hard. "Clean yourself up," he spat. "I'm going back out." The door slammed behind him, and Hannah lay still for several minutes, taking inventory of her injuries. Nothing felt broken this time, though her entire body throbbed with pain. Slowly, she pushed herself up, using the table for support as she got to her feet. In the small washroom, she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. A fresh bruise was blooming on her cheekbone, and her lip was split. She wet a cloth and pressed it gently to her face, wincing at the sting. This couldn't go on. The thought came to her with sudden clarity, cutting through the fog of pain and fear. She couldn't continue living like this, waiting for the day when Vernon's rage went too far. But what choice did she have? She had no money of her own, no family to return to. Her parents had died of fever the year before she married Vernon, leaving her with no one. Hannah changed into her nightdress, every movement an agony, and slipped into bed. Tomorrow, she decided, Tomorrow she would figure something out. For now, she would rest while Vernon was out, gathering her strength. Sleep came fitfully, broken by pain and the constant fear of Vernon's return. When the first light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains, Hannah was already awake, moving carefully through the house to prepare breakfast. Vernon hadn't returned during the night, which wasn't uncommon after one of his rages. He often stayed at the saloon until he'd drunk himself into a stupor, sometimes not coming home until midday. Hannah worked methodically, ignoring the pain that accompanied each movement. Her face was the worst, impossible to hide. The bruise on her cheekbone had darkened to a deep purple, and her split lip was swollen. She would have to stay home today, avoid the curious and pitying eyes of the townspeople. By mid-morning, the house was spotless, breakfast made and kept warm for Vernon's eventual return. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands when a knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Fear gripped her. No one ever called at the house except for Vernon's drinking friends, and they never brought anything but trouble. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Hannah rose cautiously and approached the door. "Who is it?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sheriff Taylor, Mrs. Kelly. Need a word with you." Hannah's heart pounded. She couldn't let the sheriff see her like this. Vernon would blame her for bringing attention to their private matters, as he called them. "I'm not dressed for company, Sheriff," she called through the door. "Can it wait?" There was a pause then. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Kelly. It's about your husband." A cold dread settled in Hannah's stomach. She unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see the sheriff's weathered face. His expression changed as he took in her appearance, his eyes narrowing slightly. "May I come in, Mrs. Kelly?" Hannah stepped back, allowing him inside. Sheriff Taylor removed his hat, turning it in his hands as he studied her face. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Kelly. Your husband got into an altercation at Donovan's saloon last night. He's been shot." The words seemed to come from far away, as if through water. Is Vernon dead?" Hannah heard herself ask. The sheriff nodded gravely. "I'm afraid so. Doc Harper did what he could, but the bullet caught him in the chest. He didn't suffer long." Hannah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. She should feel something: grief, shock, perhaps even relief, but there was only a strange numbness. "What happened?" she asked finally. "From what witnesses say, your husband accused Samuel Lawson of making improper advances toward you. Lawson denied it, tried to walk away, but your husband drew on him. Lawson was faster." Samuel Lawson. The name meant nothing to Hannah for a moment, then recognition dawned. The tall stranger from the general store with those piercing blue eyes. "I barely spoke to that man," Hannah said. "I don't understand why Vernon would think." Sheriff Taylor's gaze lingered on her bruised face. "Your husband had a reputation for jealousy, Mrs. Kelly, and for other things." Hannah looked away, shame burning through her. Everyone knew. Of course they knew. In a town like Bentonville, secrets didn't stay secret for long. "Lawson's in my jail now," the sheriff continued. "It was self-defense, clear as day, but I'll need to hold him until the circuit judge comes through next week." Hannah nodded mutely. "There'll be arrangements to make," Sheriff Taylor said, his tone softening, "for the burial, and you'll need to think about what comes next for you. If there's any family you can send for." "There's no one," Hannah said, her voice hollow. "I'll manage." The sheriff nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "If you need anything, Mrs. Kelly, you come see me or Mrs. Taylor. We're here to help." After the sheriff left, Hannah sat for a long time at the kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in around her. Vernon was gone. The fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years was gone with him. She should feel liberated, relieved, but instead she felt only a vast emptiness and uncertainty about what would come next. That afternoon, Hannah went to identify Vernon's body at the undertaker's. Mr. Peterson was kind, speaking in hushed tones and assuring her that everything would be handled with dignity. With what little money Vernon had left in his pocket, and the small amount Hannah had managed to hide away over the months, there was just enough for a simple pine coffin and a plot in the town cemetery. The next day, Vernon was buried in a brief ceremony attended only by Hannah, the preacher, and, surprisingly, Sheriff Taylor and his wife. As the first shovelful of dirt hit the coffin, Hannah felt tears on her cheeks, not for Vernon, she realized, but for the young woman she had been 3 years ago, full of hope for a life that had never materialized. Mrs. Taylor approached her after the service, taking Hannah's hands in her own. "You come stay with us for a while," she offered. "No one should be alone at a time like this." Hannah shook her head. "Thank you, but I'll be fine at home." Mrs. Taylor's eyes were kind but concerned. "At least come for dinner tomorrow, promise me." Unable to refuse the genuine warmth in the older woman's invitation, Hannah agreed. That night, alone in the house that had been her prison for 3 years, Hannah slept deeply for the first time in memory. When she woke, the sun was already high, streaming through the windows she had thrown open to the fresh air. Her body still ached, the bruises now in their garish yellow-green stage, but there was a lightness in her chest that felt foreign and fragile. She dressed carefully in her one good dress, a blue calico that Vernon had always said was too bright, and walked into town. She needed supplies and, more importantly, she needed to start figuring out how to support herself. The house belonged to Vernon, and while she might be allowed to stay for a time, eventually she would need to find other arrangements. The bell above Whitaker's general store jingled as she entered, and Mrs. Whitaker looked up, her expression shifting from welcome to sympathy as she took in Hannah's appearance. "Hannah, dear," she said, coming around the counter. "I was so sorry to hear about Vernon. What a shock it must have been." Hannah nodded, accepting the older woman's embrace stiffly. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. Please call me Alina. Now, what can I get for you today?" Hannah handed over her small list, and as Mrs. Whitaker gathered the items, she steeled herself to ask the question that had been forming in her mind since yesterday. "Mrs. Whitaker, Alina, I was wondering if you know of anyone looking for help. I'm a good seamstress, and I can cook and clean." Alina turned, her expression thoughtful. As a matter of fact, Martha Jenkins over at the boarding house was just saying she could use some help. Her arthritis has been acting up something terrible, and she's got 5 permanent boarders plus whatever travelers come through. Why don't you go speak with her after we're finished here? Relief washed over Hannah. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I will, thank you." As Alina wrapped Hannah's purchases in brown paper, she hesitated, then said, "I hope you don't think me forward, Hannah, but I want you to know that none of us blame you for what happened with that Cowboy Lawson. Vernon always had a temper, especially when he was drinking." Hannah's cheeks burned. "I barely spoke to Mr. Lawson." "I know that, dear, and so does everyone else who matters. Vernon saw what he wanted to see." Hannah paid for her goods and left the store, her mind turning over Alina's words. Everyone in town seemed to have known what was happening in her marriage, yet no one had intervened. But could she blame them? She had never asked for help, had hidden her bruises and made excuses for Vernon's behavior at every turn. The boarding house was a large 2-story structure near the town's small train station. Martha Jenkins, a widow in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, looked Hannah up and down when she inquired about work. "Alina Whitaker sent you." "Well, that's good enough for me. I need someone who can cook for the boarders and help with the cleaning. The work's hard, but I pay fair. Can you start tomorrow?" Hannah nodded, relief washing through her. Yes, Mrs. Jenkins, thank you. It's Martha. And we'll say 6 in the morning until after the dinner service is cleaned up. 6 days a week. Sundays yours to do with as you please. They agreed on wages that weren't generous but would be enough for Hannah to live on if she was careful. As she turned to leave, Martha's voice stopped her. I'm sorry about what happened to your husband, girl, but not sorry about what's happened to your face enough times before. Hannah stiffened but didn't turn around. Thank you for the opportunity, Martha. I'll see you tomorrow. That evening, Hannah kept her promise to have dinner with the Taylors. The sheriff's home was modest but comfortable, and Mrs. Taylor, call me Rebecca, dear, was a warm hostess who didn't press Hannah to talk about Vernon or her plans. After the meal, as Rebecca cleared the dishes, Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. Mrs. Kelly, there's something I need to discuss with you. Hannah tensed, her hands folding in her lap. Yes, Sheriff. The circuit judge will be here on Friday. There'll be a hearing about your husband's death. He paused, watching her face. Given the circumstances and the witnesses, it's likely to be ruled self-defense, but the judge may want to hear from you. From me. But I wasn't there. No, but you knew your husband, and you had a brief interaction with Lawson before the incident. Hannah's throat tightened. What would I need to say? The sheriff's eyes were kind but direct. The truth, Mrs. Kelly, just the truth. On Friday morning, Hannah dressed in her blue calico dress and made her way to the town hall where the circuit judge would hold court. She had worked at the boarding house for 3 days now, finding a surprising comfort in the routine of cooking and cleaning for others, in the simple gratitude of the boarders for a well-prepared meal. The town hall was crowded when she arrived, and Hannah felt the weight of eyes on her as she made her way to a seat near the front. The bruise on her face had faded somewhat but was still visible, a sickly yellow against her pale skin. Judge Harmon, a stern-faced man with a thick gray beard, called the court to order promptly at 9. Samuel Lawson was brought in, no longer wearing the dusty work clothes she had seen him in at the general store, but a clean shirt and vest. His hands were free of restraints, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his circumstances. His eyes found hers almost immediately, and Hannah felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. There was no pity in his gaze, only a steady acknowledgement that unsettled and comforted her at the same time. The proceedings moved quickly. Sheriff Taylor testified first, outlining the events as witnessed by several patrons of Donovan's saloon. Vernon, drunk and belligerent, had accused Lawson of dishonoring his wife. Lawson had denied it and attempted to leave. Vernon had drawn his pistol. Lawson, faster and sober, had fired a single shot in self-defense. Lottie Mason testified next, her elaborately styled hair and painted face drawing disapproving looks from the town matrons. She confirmed that Vernon had been drinking heavily and became enraged when she mentioned seeing his wife speaking with Lawson at the general store. Vernon always did have a jealous streak, Lottie said, her voice carrying through the quiet hall. Especially about his wife. Said she needed watching. Hannah kept her gaze fixed on her hands, aware of the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. Then it was Lawson's turn to speak. His voice was deep and steady as he recounted the events, matching the other witnesses' accounts. He had been in Bentonville only a week, working for Mr. Patterson on a construction project. He had encountered Hannah Kelly only once, briefly, at the general store. I didn't know who she was, he said. Just noticed she seemed careful with herself, like she was hurting. When she dropped her package, I picked it up for her. That was the extent of our interaction. And the night of the incident, Judge Harmon prompted. I was having a quiet drink before heading back to my room at the boarding house. Kelly came in already drunk, started shouting about me disrespecting him by talking to his wife. I tried to explain we'd barely spoken, but he wouldn't listen. When I tried to leave to avoid trouble, he pulled his gun. Lawson's eyes found Hannah's again. I'm sorry for what happened, madam. I never intended any harm. Judge Harmon called Hannah to testify next. Her legs felt unsteady as she made her way to the front of the hall, aware of every eye on her. The judge asked her to confirm her relationship to the deceased and then to describe her interaction with Lawson. We exchanged only a few words, Hannah said, her voice stronger than she expected. He was polite when I dropped my package. That was all. And your husband's temperament, Mrs. Kelly. Would you describe him as a jealous man? Hannah hesitated, years of protective instinct warring with the truth. Yes, she finally said. Vernon was possessive. Judge Harmon's eyes lingered on her face, on the fading bruise that no amount of powder could completely conceal. I see, he said quietly. And on the night in question, did your husband make any statements about Mr. Lawson before leaving your home? He mentioned that Lottie Mason had told him she saw me speaking with a cowboy at Whitaker's store. He was angry about it. Angry enough to threaten violence. Hannah's hands twisted in her lap. Vernon was often angry, Your Honor. The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Kelly. You may step down. After a few more witnesses, Judge Harmon called a brief recess to consider his ruling. Hannah stepped outside for air, feeling drained by the ordeal of speaking about Vernon in public, of acknowledging, even in the most oblique terms, the reality of her marriage. When court reconvened, Judge Harmon wasted no time in delivering his verdict. Based on the testimony of multiple witnesses and the evident facts of the case, I find that Samuel Lawson acted in legitimate self-defense when he shot and killed Vernon Kelly. Mr. Lawson, you are free to go with the court's apologies for your detention. Relief washed through Hannah, though she wasn't entirely sure why. She had no stake in Lawson's fate, yet the thought of him being punished for defending himself against Vernon's rage seemed deeply unjust. As the crowd began to disperse, Hannah made her way toward the door, intent on getting back to the boarding house where Martha would be expecting her help with lunch preparations. She had nearly reached the exit when a voice stopped her. Mrs. Kelly. She turned to find Samuel Lawson standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just blue but had flecks of gray in them, like the sky before a storm. Mr. Lawson, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I wanted to express my condolences, he said. Whatever else, losing a husband is a hard thing. Hannah studied him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Most men would have assumed she was relieved, and perhaps she was, but Lawson seemed to understand that the truth was more complicated. Thank you, she said simply. Sheriff Taylor mentioned you're working at the boarding house now. Hannah nodded, wondering at his interest. Yes, Martha Jenkins hired me. That's good. Martha's a fair employer. He hesitated, turning his hat in his hands. I'm staying there myself until the job with Patterson is finished. I know. I've cooked your breakfast for the past 3 days. A small smile touched his lips. Those were your biscuits, best I've had since leaving Texas. Despite herself, Hannah felt a warmth at the compliment. You're from Texas, Mr. Lawson, born and raised near San Antonio. Been working my way west for the past few years, taking jobs where I can find them. He glanced toward the door. I should let you get back to work. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything that's happened. Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had received more sincere sympathy from this stranger than she had from most of the townspeople she'd known for years. Good day, Mrs. Kelly, Lawson said, settling his hat on his head and moving past her toward the door. Mr. Lawson, she called after him, surprising herself. He turned back, eyebrows raised in question. Thank you. For your testimony today." He nodded once, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary, then he was gone. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm for Hannah. She rose before dawn each day to help Martha prepare breakfast for the boarders, spent the morning cleaning rooms and doing laundry, and then turned her attention to the midday and evening meals. The work was hard but satisfying, and Martha, for all her brusque manner, was a fair employer who never raised her voice or her hand. Samuel Lawson took his meals with the other boarders, and Hannah found herself oddly aware of his presence at the table. He was quieter than the others, who were mostly traveling salesmen and railroad workers, but he was unfailingly polite, always thanking her for the food and sometimes offering a brief comment on how good it was. One evening in late August, nearly a month after Vernon's death, Hannah was setting out a blackberry cobbler for dessert when Martha appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Hannah, I need you to take a plate up to Mr. Lawson's room. He's been working late at the Patterson job and just came in, looking half dead on his feet. Said he'd eat in his room rather than have you set the table again." Hannah hesitated. She had never entered any of the boarders' rooms while they were present, an unspoken rule that helped maintain propriety. Martha seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry, girl. Lawson's a gentleman, and I wouldn't ask if I could manage the stairs myself today. This rain has my joints screaming." Hannah nodded, preparing a plate with the pot roast and vegetables she'd made for dinner, adding a generous portion of cobbler. She carried the tray up the narrow stairs to the second floor, to room number 4 at the end of the hall. She knocked softly, balancing the tray with one hand. "Come in," Lawson's voice called. Hannah opened the door to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. He looked up in surprise, clearly having expected Martha. "Mrs. Kelly," he said, standing quickly. "You didn't need to bring that up yourself." "Martha's arthritis is bothering her," Hannah explained, feeling strangely awkward. "I don't mind." Lawson gestured to the small table by the window. "You can set it there. Thank you." Hannah placed the tray down, then turned to go, but something made her pause. Lawson's right hand was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, spots of blood seeping through the cloth. "You're hurt," she said before she could stop herself. Lawson glanced down at his hand as if noticing the injury for the first time. "It's nothing. Caught it on a nail while framing the new schoolhouse. It needs proper cleaning and bandaging," Hannah said. Years of caring for her younger siblings and later Vernon's injuries when he'd get into fights, making her voice authoritative. "I can help if you'd like." Lawson looked surprised at the offer, then nodded. "I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Kelly." Hannah left briefly to gather clean bandages and some of Martha's homemade salve, returning to find Lawson seated at the table, his injured hand resting beside the untouched plate. "You should eat while it's hot," she said, setting down her supplies. "I can wait." "I'm more interested in keeping all my fingers," he replied with a small smile that transformed his serious face. "Food can wait." Hannah pulled the other chair close and gently took his hand, unwrapping the bloodied cloth to reveal a deep gash across his palm. "This needs stitches," she said, examining the wound. "Had worse," Lawson replied. "The salve and a clean bandage will do." Hannah set to work, cleaning the wound carefully with soap and water she'd brought up in a basin. Lawson didn't flinch, though she knew it must hurt. "You've done this before," he observed, "many times." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. As she worked, she was intensely aware of his gaze on her face, studying her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. The bruises Vernon had left were almost completely faded now, just the faintest yellowish tinge remaining on her cheekbone. "The men who hired me to help build the schoolhouse said it was your idea," Lawson said as she began applying the salve. To use the money from the sale of your house. Hannah's hand stilled momentarily. It was true. She had sold Vernon's house as soon as legally possible, using half the money to secure a small room of her own behind the milliner's shop, and donating the rest to the town's long-stalled effort to build a proper schoolhouse. "The children need a school more than I needed that house," she said simply, resuming her task. "And I couldn't have stayed there anyway." "Too many memories," Lawson guessed. Hannah nodded, wrapping clean bandage around his hand. "None of them good." She tied off the bandage and began gathering her supplies, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt, alone with him in his room, holding his hand in hers. "Thank you," Lawson said, his voice low. "Not just for this, but for what you did with the schoolhouse. It says a lot about you." Hannah stood, clutching the basin. "Your food's getting cold, Mr. Lawson." "Sam," he said. "My name is Sam." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and something more, something that made Hannah's heart beat faster. "Good night, Sam," she said softly, and left before he could respond. That night, lying in her small room behind the milliner's shop, Hannah found herself thinking about Sam Lawson's steady gaze and gentle hands. It had been so long since a man had looked at her with something other than ownership or pity in his eyes. Sam looked at her as if he really saw her, and wasn't disappointed by what he found. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Hannah found herself looking forward to the moments when her path crossed with Sam's at the boarding house. He always had a kind word for her, sometimes lingering after the other boarders had finished their meals to compliment her cooking or ask how her day had been. Martha noticed, of course. The older woman didn't miss much. "That Lawson boy's sweet on you," she remarked one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Been watching you like a man dying of thirst, eyes a cool stream." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "Don't be ridiculous, he's just polite." Martha snorted. "I've known polite and I've known sweet on someone. That boy's the latter." She paused in her dish drying. "Would be a bad thing if he was. He's a good man, works hard, treats people right." "I buried my husband less than 2 months ago," Hannah said, scrubbing at a pot with more force than necessary. "A husband who treated you like a punching bag," Martha said bluntly. "No one would think ill of you for finding some happiness, girl." Hannah said nothing, but Martha's words stayed with her. Was it possible to start over, to find something good after everything? The idea seemed so foreign, so unattainable, that she hardly dared consider it. On a warm September afternoon, Hannah was returning from delivering mending she'd done for extra money when she spotted Sam Lawson outside the nearly completed schoolhouse. He was on a ladder, working on the roof, his shirt sticking to his back in the heat. She should have continued on, but something made her pause. Sam glanced down as if sensing her presence, and a smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Kelly," he called, climbing down the ladder with an easy grace that belied his size. "Come to check on your investment." Hannah approached, shielding her eyes from the sun. "It's coming along well. The children will be so pleased to have a real school instead of meeting in the back of the church. Should be finished by the end of next week," Sam said, wiping his brow with a bandana. "Just in time for the fall term to start." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Sam said, "I'm heading out once it's done. Got a job offer up in Prescott." The news shouldn't have affected her as it did, like a physical blow. "That's good," she managed to say. "Prescott is a fine town, I hear." Sam studied her face, his eyes searching. "I've been thinking, though, that maybe Bentonville has its advantages." Hannah's heart quickened. "Such as?" "Good people, opportunity, and—" He hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind about something. "Mrs. Kelly, Hannah, would you allow me to call on you properly before I make any decisions about leaving?" The directness of the question took her by surprise. "Call on me," she repeated. "Yes. With your permission, I'd like to take you for a drive on Sunday afternoon, if you're free." Hannah was aware of the significance of such an invitation. In a small town like Bentonville, being seen driving out together would be as good as announcing an understanding between them. "People will talk," she said cautiously. "Let them," Sam replied with a shrug. "I'm more concerned with what you think than with what they say." Hannah looked into his steady blue eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there. No hidden agenda, no desire to possess or control. Just a man asking for the chance to know her better. "Yes," she said, the word feeling both terrifying and right. "I'd like that." On Sunday afternoon, Hannah dressed carefully in her blue calico dress, pinning her hair up in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot. She had declined Martha's offer of rouge, to bring some color to those cheeks, girl, but had accepted the loan of a pretty lace collar that softened the high neckline of her dress. Sam arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, driving a rented buggy from the livery stable. He had dressed for the occasion as well, wearing a clean white shirt and a vest she hadn't seen before, his usually unruly hair tamed somewhat by water and a comb. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her into the buggy, his hand warm and steady on hers. They drove out of town, following the river that ran past Bentonville, talking easily about small things, the weather, the progress on the schoolhouse, a humorous incident with one of Martha's more difficult boarders. Sam was a good listener, Hannah discovered, asking questions and seeming genuinely interested in her answers. He stopped the buggy on a bluff overlooking the river, where a stand of cottonwoods provided shade. From a basket behind the seat, he produced a modest picnic bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of lemonade. "Martha helped me," he admitted with a grin as he spread a blanket on the ground. "Said I'd make a poor showing if I tried to court you with my own cooking." The word court hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly but both aware of its implication. They ate and talked, and Hannah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. Sam told her about growing up in Texas, about his parents who still ran a small ranch there, about his 3 sisters who wrote him letters filled with news and gentle scolding for his wandering ways. "And you," he asked, "where did you grow up?" Hannah told him about her childhood in Missouri, about losing her parents to fever, about coming west with an aunt who had since passed away. She didn't mention Vernon or their marriage, and Sam didn't press. As the afternoon waned, they packed up the remains of their picnic and walked along the riverbank before returning to the buggy. Sam's hand found hers as they walked, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that felt both bold and natural. When they returned to town, Sam drove slowly down the main street, making no effort to conceal their outing from the curious eyes of the townspeople who were out enjoying the fine Sunday weather. He drew the buggy to a stop outside the milliner's shop where Hannah's small room was located. "I'd like to see you again," he said as he helped her down from the buggy. "Perhaps dinner at the hotel restaurant on Wednesday." Hannah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." Sam's smile was warm. "Until Wednesday, then." He didn't try to kiss her, which Hannah appreciated. Instead, he squeezed her hand once more before climbing back into the buggy and driving away. That night, Hannah lay in her narrow bed, replaying the afternoon in her mind. Sam Lawson was everything Vernon had not been: kind, considerate, respectful. The way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years, perhaps ever. But doubt crept in as the night deepened. Was she rushing into something because she was lonely? Because she was grateful to him for freeing her from Vernon, however unintentionally? And what about her own scars? Not just the physical ones that were fading, but the deeper wounds that Vernon's cruelty had left on her soul. Could she ever truly trust a man again? These questions haunted her through the night and into the next day as she went about her work at the boarding house. Martha noticed her distraction but said nothing until they were alone in the kitchen after lunch. "You're thinking too hard, girl," the older woman said, startling Hannah from her thoughts. "I can practically hear the wheels turning in that head of yours." Hannah smiled weakly. "Is it that obvious?" "To me it is." Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "Want to tell me what's troubling you? Or should I guess it has something to do with a certain tall cowboy and your drive yesterday?" Hannah sighed, setting down the potato she'd been peeling. "I don't know if I'm ready, Martha, for any of this." Martha's expression softened. "Nobody ever feels ready for the good things, Hannah. We spend so much time preparing for the worst that when something good comes along, we don't know what to do with it." "I'm afraid," Hannah admitted, "of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person." "That's natural after what you've been through." Martha came to sit beside her at the kitchen table. "But Sam Lawson isn't Vernon Kelly. Anyone with eyes can see that." "I thought I knew Vernon when I married him," Hannah said softly. "He was charming, attentive." "The violence didn't start until after the wedding," Martha nodded. "That's how men like Vernon operate. They hide their true nature until they think they've got you trapped." She reached across the table to pat Hannah's hand. "But you've learned from that experience. You're wiser now. Trust your instincts." "And what if my instincts are broken?" Hannah asked. "What if I can't tell the difference anymore between a good man and one who just seems good?" Martha considered this. "Then trust the evidence of your eyes. Sam's been in town for months now. Ever seen him lose his temper? Speak harshly to anyone? Drink to excess?" Hannah shook her head. "And how does he look at you? Like you're something he wants to possess or something he respects?" "Respects," Hannah said without hesitation. Martha smiled. "There you have it then. I'm not saying marry the man tomorrow, just give yourself permission to see where this might go." Wednesday evening came, and Hannah met Sam at the Grand Hotel restaurant, the nicest establishment in Bentonville, though modest compared to what one might find in a larger city. Sam was waiting for her in the lobby, standing when he saw her approach, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said, and Hannah felt herself blush. She had splurged on a new dress, a deep green that Martha assured her brought out the gold in her brown eyes. Dinner was pleasant, the food better than what Hannah could prepare at the boarding house with its limited budget. Sam was attentive but not overbearing, making her laugh with stories of his travels and listening intently when she spoke. Several townspeople stopped by their table to greet them, some with obvious curiosity in their eyes, others with genuine warmth. After dinner, Sam walked her home, their pace slow in the cool evening air. When they reached the door to her room, he took her hand in his. "I've been offered a permanent position here," he said, "overseeing the construction of several new buildings as the town expands. I've decided to accept." Hannah felt a flutter of both pleasure and anxiety. "What about the job in Prescott?" "Prescott has plenty of builders," Sam said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've found reasons to stay in Bentonville." The meaning behind his words was clear, and Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad," she said simply. Sam's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Hannah, I know it hasn't been long since. Everything. I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious. I care for you, and I'd like the chance to show you that not all men are like Vernon Kelly." Hannah looked up into his face at the sincerity in his eyes and felt something inside her shift, a wall beginning to crumble. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Sam's smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Hannah," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night, Sam," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As autumn deepened into winter, Hannah and Sam's courtship progressed with a deliberate care that the town of Bentonville followed with interest. They attended church together on Sundays, took regular drives when the weather permitted, and had dinner at the hotel once a week. Sam visited her at the boarding house when she was working, sometimes helping with tasks that required strength or height, much to Martha's approval. Never seen a man so willing to haul water and chop wood just for the chance to spend a few minutes in a kitchen with a pretty woman, the older woman remarked one day, watching as Sam carried in a load of firewood. Hannah found herself opening up to Sam in ways she hadn't with anyone before. She told him about her marriage to Vernon, about the first time he had struck her just 3 months after their wedding, about how the violence had escalated over the years. Sam listened without judgment, his eyes sometimes darkening with anger at what she had endured, but never making her feel ashamed or responsible. In turn, Sam shared his own past with her. He had been engaged once to a girl in Texas, but she had died of influenza before they could marry. The loss had set him wandering, taking jobs across the West, never settling anywhere for long until Bentonville. Something about this place felt right from the start, he told her one evening as they sat by the fire in the boarding house parlor, the other residents having retired for the night. Or maybe it was just you. Christmas came, bringing a rare dusting of snow to Bentonville. Hannah, now working not only at the boarding house but also as a part-time teacher's assistant at the new school, found herself busier than ever but happier than she could remember being. On Christmas Eve, after the church service and town celebration, Sam walked her home through the gently falling snow. At her door, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas, Hannah," he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. Hannah unwrapped it carefully to find a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with inlaid pieces forming a pattern of leaves and flowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," Sam urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver locket, simple but elegant. Hannah lifted it carefully, her eyes questioning. "It opens," Sam said. Hannah did so, finding it empty inside. "For memories worth keeping," Sam explained. "To replace the ones you'd rather forget." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have something for you too." She retrieved a package from inside her room, watching nervously as Sam unwrapped it to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes. "I made it myself," she said. "I know it's not much, it's perfect," Sam interrupted, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "No one's made something for me by hand since my mother knitted my last pair of socks before I left Texas." He stepped closer, his expression serious. "Hannah, there's something I want to ask you, but I don't want to rush you." Hannah's heart began to race. "Ask me," she said softly. Sam took her hands in his. "I love you, Hannah Kelly. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" The words hung in the cold night air, snow falling around them like stars. Hannah looked into Sam's eyes and saw everything she had ever wanted but never thought she would find: respect, kindness, and a love that didn't seek to possess or control. "Yes," she said, the word coming easily, naturally. "Yes, I'll marry you, Sam Lawson." Sam's face broke into a smile of pure joy. He pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss tender and reverent, asking rather than demanding, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. They were married on a bright January morning in 1879, in the small Bentonville church filled with townspeople who had watched their courtship unfold. Martha Jenkins sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Sheriff and Mrs. Taylor beamed from their place of honor, having become dear friends to Hannah in the months since Vernon's death. Hannah wore a new dress of pale blue, with Martha's lace collar and Sam's silver locket around her neck. Sam stood tall and handsome in a new suit. The blue scarf Hannah had made him folded neatly in his breast pocket, close to my heart, he had told her. As they spoke their vows, Hannah felt the last shadows of her past receding. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Sam kissed her with gentle reverence before the assembled guests, she knew that she had found not just safety but joy, not just escape but a true home. They made their home in a small but comfortable house Sam had built himself on a plot of land at the edge of town, with a view of the mountains in the distance. Hannah continued to teach at the school, discovering a talent and passion for education she hadn't known she possessed. Sam's construction business thrived as Bentonville grew, the railroad bringing new opportunities and people to the once sleepy town. In the spring of 1880, their first child was born, a son they named James, after Sam's father. Hannah, holding her newborn son in her arms with Sam beside her, marveled at how far she had come from the frightened, broken woman who had once hidden her bruises and her pain from the world. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered to Sam as they watched their son sleeping in his cradle. Sam's arm tightened around her waist, his eyes full of love as they met hers. "You deserve every happiness, Hannah. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them in 1882, followed by another son, Daniel, in 1885. Their home expanded as well, Sam adding rooms as their family increased, always making sure Hannah had input on every decision, large or small. The Bruises Vernon had left faded completely, but sometimes in quiet moments, Hannah would catch Sam looking at her with that same gentle gaze she had first noticed in Whitaker's general store eyes that had seen her hurts and had stayed gentle, that had recognized her pain without defining her by it. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Sam took her hand, his thumb tracing the faint scar on her palm from a cooking accident years before. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice soft in the twilight. Hannah looked at him, at the face that had become as familiar and beloved as her own reflection, at the man who had taught her that love could heal as well as hurt, that strength could protect rather than dominate. "Not one," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not a single one." And as the Arizona sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Hannah Kelly Lawson, once broken but now whole, once hidden but now seen, knew that she had found not just a love story, but a life worth living, one where every hurt was acknowledged and every joy celebrated, where gentleness had proven stronger than cruelty, and where the eyes that had once found her bruises now saw only the woman she had always been meant to be.